My video outlining my thoughts on Horizon Forbidden West came out March 3rd, 2022, 2 days after I had initially planned it to release, and that's because between the 24th and the 3rd, the days that I worked on this video, I spent 2 full days practically incapable of doing anything because I was too busy being wholly engrossed by something completely different. What possibly could have come out in that time frame that would drag my attention away entirely for 2 full days and has continued to be my fevered obsession ever since? You guessed it, Shadow Warrior 3. This is a really fun FPS game with a lot of style and oh my god! I've been playing Elden Ring like I've never played anything before. I don't think I've ever given so much of my time and attention to a game in my life, and I know a lot of people are feeling the same. Fans and outlets alike are calling this one of the greatest games ever made. They're talking about how this is a breath of fresh air compared to the unending stream of soulless open world games that have plagued the market in recent years. This game is getting so much positive attention, and you love to see it. But there's also a group of people, even though they are in the minority, that have been having problems with this open world design. The conversation about FromSoft games and difficulty and accessibility rages on, but somewhat separate from that is the claim that the world giving you minimal guidance, no quest log, no explicit explanations about the fact that you can just ignore bosses like the Tree Sentinel, and no indications of where possible areas of interest might be, leads to an overall experience that alienates certain players and makes this already difficult game even harder for people to enjoy. I think these complaints are being swept under the rug in favor of calling Elden Ring objectively superior in its open world design, but I got to thinking about it, the pros and cons of each, what I liked or disliked about different open world games, and whether it was tied to their open world philosophies. And the conclusion that I came to is that I think the blame or praise being thrown at the formula and structure of these games is a bit misplaced, and instead the differences in quality lie in specific elements of the execution of those respective styles. Not only do I think that both of these types of open world games are perfectly viable, but I actually like that we get more checklist style open world games than iconless ones. Let me explain myself. The checklist open world game, or Ubi-Type game as I'm going to be affectionately calling it, has been getting dunked on for years now, and it's kind of fun, especially when it's about horribly cluttered UI or something. But let's talk a little bit less about the outer coding here, and more about what makes these games what they are. Bland, repetitive, uninspired, copy and paste. Yes, I'm talking about all the kids commenting on my Cuphead video saying the same thing for the 800th time. Why are there so many kids here? Go away. And I'm also talking about my jokes, because I made almost the exact same one 2 months ago, but primarily I'm talking about the criticisms leveled at these games. What it usually comes down to is the word formulaic. These games all feel the same. Within themselves, their objectives feel samey, and compared to each other, they all feel samey. But honestly, I don't think that has to do with the formula itself. It has much more to do with the cutting corners approach to these games and taking the wrong lessons from one another. I guess I should first explain this formula for the uninitiated if you're out there. Ubi-type games usually start with the world map being covered by a fog or block of some sort, which you initially wade through with a blind eye as you either follow the path that you're given from your currently tracked quest, or just run through in different directions if anything piques your interest. If anything of note is nearby, it'll pop up on your map and compass, usually with a question mark, but once you reach it, it reveals itself as usually one of a certain set of repeated open world activities, items, or objectives. At certain intervals on the map, you can find points of interest, usually tall structures, that you can climb in order to reveal a certain section of your map and all of the possible activities in that area. Like I said, most of these activities are reoccurring, with there almost always being things like enemy encampments, side characters with quests to give, and small menial tasks in return for ability points. Now, it sounds tedious and boring, which in a lot of cases it is, but I'd actually argue that for each of these elements there's been at least one game that's perfected them and shown how exciting they can actually be, which leads me to the conclusion that this formula would be incredible if it was used properly. Let's start with the general benefits of this style of game, and I think the most important one is readability. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be able to keep track of things that you've done, things that you've currently left unfinished, where to go to see that one NPC that you met 50 hours and 78 towns ago, etc. A lot of people's brains need structure and a distinct purpose to pursue certain things, mine included. I'll talk about that a bit more when I discuss Elden Ring's open world, and I really don't think this is a matter of better or worse, it's a personal preference. People aren't dumb for wanting or needing more explicit tracking or icons to aid their discovery of the map. Sometimes juggling all the little details gets really difficult. Hi, me from the future here, I found a good example of this that I wanted to throw in here because I think it helps back up my point a little bit. Early on in Ranni's quest in Elden Ring, which is a really lengthy quest, you're asked to find somebody by the name of Selen, with no indication of where she is. Even if you'd found her by that point, which I had, remembering where she was a hassle because 20 to 25 hours had elapsed since then, and not to mention this game is full of characters with ridiculously similar names, and I'm not always paying the most attention to what their names actually are. Especially the people that leave as little impact as this person did. This wasn't like somebody that was at the round table or my first merchant or something. This was just kind of a random person that I found. Being able to track this would have been super helpful for me personally, and I actually had to Google my way into figuring out where the heck this thing was, and I am not alone in that. I've seen people on the official Elden Ring subreddit talk about how they're just Googling all the NPC stuff. This is a very common thing. I'm not advocating for FromSoft to add some kind of tracking in their quests. They do this all the time with all of their games, but I'm just saying vague is not superior in all aspects. To kind of add on to that, in my opinion, with just a tiny bit of tweaking, Ubi-Type games can actually appeal more to every kind of player than Elden Wild-type games. A lot of recent titles have been giving options to turn off elements of the HUD, remove markers from the map, and just let you experience the game with no hand-holding, and I know people who've done that. These settings allow for the enhanced readability to be optional, which isn't something that you can say for the other type of game, and that's a plus. But I will say that the current state of these games usually relies on the map markers and the UI to actually inform the design, so this way of playing is not exactly the most comfortable. They need to do a better job at accommodating for people who play like this in order for it to improve, because a lot of the times the lack of hints or descriptive explanations of where a character wants to meet you, for example, lead to a lot of pawing around the world with your eyes closed. Still, if this was improved on, I think you get the best of both worlds in that scenario. On top of those other positives, I definitely feel like these games suit story-focused titles a lot better. A lot of games in this genre fail in the storytelling department for many reasons that I've outlined in the past, but as far as structure goes, I'd much prefer being told where to go and what to do next in as obvious a way as possible if there's an emphasis on a more traditional storytelling experience. There's a reason that the two main examples that people bring up of less hand-holdy open-world game design have light or amorphous storytelling. It's easy to spend like 30 hours between story moments in those games, and it's also really easy to miss things without meaning to. It's really just another example of how there's not necessarily a good or bad here, it's far more situational. What's always left me scratching my head though with open world games is that I feel like I've seen a solution to almost every single problem that they tend to have in at least one of the games in this genre, but unlike the rest of the industry, it feels like these improvements are being ignored by the time that the next game comes out. The fact of the matter is, 99.99% of games out there are heavily formulaic, at least in one major aspect. That's a real statistic, you can look it up, but don't look it up, please. Just trust me, if you looked it up, it would be a fact, okay? But don't look it up. Look at Horizon Forbidden West. It does mimic the template of a lot of its contemporaries, albeit with a few small tweaks. But it also has robot dinosaurs, which is a pretty killer new idea. Now shift your attention to Elden Ring, which is being praised deservedly for its bold and unique open world. But it is also sticking very closely to the combat that From has been working and iterating on for a decade. The entire core combat, as well as the trademark Souls concepts of bonfires and souls being lost, etc., are present here. It's formulaic in that sense. The key to it all, though, in my opinion, why many people find this fresh and this tired, is the one word that I snuck in there for the second example: iterating. While tons of game genres take an incredibly long time to evolve, I feel like eventually they do, but Ubi-Type games have this weird phenomenon that I've touched on before where so many of them decide, hey, we're gonna innovate, we're gonna iterate, and they do so in a substantial way, but then the next developer goes, alright, we're gonna innovate, and we're gonna iterate, and they do, but then they forget to incorporate all the cool additions that the first studio made. And we end up with this genre that's kind of staying in place, or maybe just moving laterally. It's got short-term memory loss or something. For somebody like me, who only plays a select few games in this genre, that's enough for now. I'm actually one of 4 people who's not sick of this formula because every time I see it, it is slightly different. But for anyone who plays these games more frequently, the fatigue starts to set in despite so many of these experiences seemingly shaking things up. Let's use Forbidden West as an example again because it's the most recent. This game says, hey, people hate the tedium of climbing up towers in Assassin's Creed to unlock a map. Let's instead make every single one of these a puzzle or a really unique and involved climbing section. It's honestly really great. This is an actual mechanic now, and an enjoyable one at that instead of a chore to do. And yet, climbing in Forbidden West feels 2 steps back from what Assassin's Creed does. Your grapples feel like they have a weird hitch, you get locked in animations, and you have limitations of where you can climb. It all feels kind of sticky, for lack of a better term. Like I said in my dedicated video, it's really cinematic and advanced, but it feels kind of back to the basics in terms of functionality. Oh, what's that? People didn't like that Spider-Man had such a bare-bones selection of open-world activities that were usually too quick and easy or not that interesting, including lame puzzles. Okay, let's have way more fully fleshed out activities around the world that do show up multiple times, but they have unique challenges, involve your brain a lot more, and are often longer and filled with more variety. Except, people loved how even boring tasks were made fun in that game because of the traversal. Just fun movement is all you need in a game sometimes. And yet, Horizon's mounts feel clunky and get stuck in terrain and have a hard time with any level of elevation. They don't feel good to be on. With your movement also, for some reason, constantly being stopped on mount or on ground because grabbing supplies isn't seamless. You gotta stop completely and pick things up with an animation. It's super annoying. It makes basic movement throughout the world feel awful. How much do you want to bet that Ghost of Tsushima's incredible and simple solution for finding a happy medium between explicit instructions and intuitive, immersive exploration, with animals, smokestacks, and even the wind leading you to cool places without the need for your map, will not be seen again in any capacity until Ghost of Tsushima 2. They literally did it, guys. They fixed the problem that everyone's been arguing about this for so long. They fixed it, and yet I highly doubt that anyone will learn from that. On the other hand, enemy encampments are in theory a really good idea if they were all designed in more robust and interesting ways, all being different from each other in more than just basic enemy placement. Setting up unique and dangerous encounters throughout the game world isn't an inherently bad idea, but so many of these games have gotten away with being lazy in their design of these encampments while they still succeed that other games feel like designing them in a copy and paste way is perfectly excusable. In short, basically what I'm saying is they're all learning the wrong lessons from one another and refusing to accept the right ones. I genuinely think that the Ubi-Type formula is being constantly improved on, but everyone is improving on the baseline that was set years and years and years ago, which is why I think fatigue is setting in. This style of game has the potential to completely transform itself while still maintaining its identity. A good open world game does not need to stray as far away from the norm as unlike the last section, I don't have a laundry list of goods and bads for Elden Wild games. To me, these are far more about one overarching goal than they are about any individual elements, and I can surmise it in 3 words: exploration and discovery. These titles thrive off your curiosity and work towards paying it off. You want to look in every crevice to see if there might be a dungeon or a cave with a new mini-boss to fight. You look off at a broken tower in the distance and say, alright, I feel like there might be something worth seeing there, so let's give it a look, and you climb up it for a new sorcery or precious item. You find a group of enemies and immediately survey what you have in your hand and what's in the surrounding area and hatch up a unique plan to take everybody out in a way that you haven't done before. It's intuitive, it's interesting, and it trusts the player, giving them agency over a strict set of rules. But I also think with it being that dependent on how a player thinks, the balance that it has becomes a lot more fragile. There's no way to regulate the experience, so to speak. Everyone will play and think through it differently, which is really exciting, and namely leads to that very rare experience nowadays where you can talk with your friends about the stuff that you've done and they can mention stuff that you've never even seen after 87 hours. It presents something very rare and very novel, but it's also easier for people to fall off the wagon. I think the biggest danger in Ubi-Type games is a player will find it boring or unexciting, which definitely sucks, but I think if you don't click with these games, the experience is much worse. Let me use myself as an example. I had a chunk of time during Elden Ring where, because of my completionist nature, at least in games that I really like, I was sniffing around every corner, stopping to read every message that might point me to something, and constantly opening the map to see if I had covered every square inch of what I could, and it got really annoying. Mind you, I ultimately love the exploration in this game, and this wasn't its fault. It isn't trying to appeal to every single type of player on the planet, it's just trying to execute a specific vision. But for a long while, I just couldn't get on the right wavelength. I knew I shouldn't be using my map as much as I was, I knew I should explore just the things that I saw around me, but I just had this urge to look at every single corner, and until I basically forced myself to explore more organically and ignore my annoying impulses, I didn't feel very enraptured with the process. It's so up to the player to determine the pacing and discovery of everything that sometimes it's really hard to align with. I felt somewhat of the opposite back when Breath of the Wild came out. I was 17, I hadn't played all that many games at that point, to be honest. I booted it up, and for the life of me, I couldn't find the purpose to do anything. Call me a dumb kid, but man, it was not easy for me to just be given a stick and half a direction and find my path to the end while exploring all the way through. In theory, that's so exciting, but I just never knew what to do. I always felt like I was playing the game wrong, and I bounced off it quickly. I always meant to go back back, and I might just do so after playing Elden Ring and seeing how my sense of how to explore a game world has improved, but I do think that games like these require a specific type of thinking that can drive certain people away much easier. But to kind of close off on this section, I do want to mention that I don't actually think, in Elden Ring's case at least, that its biggest accomplishments as an open world game come from its more free-form structure. That certainly helps it feel like the lands between are a place that you're dropped into and now have to navigate on your own, but when I really sat and thought about it, I found that most of my favorite things about this game aren't really tied to its overall setup and lack of icons. If we're talking specifically to as it pertains to the open world, I think the biggest positives in this game are the unique locations and the bevy of surprises, both of which could be easily adjusted to be inserted into Ubi-Type games. It was incredible starting with this tiny piece of open world map, not knowing how much else there was going to be, only for it to slowly add more and more as you went along. The sense of scope was so much more impressive when you thought you were reaching closer to the full map and saw that it just kept going, especially whenever you're teleported somewhere else and all of a sudden the map doubles in size. But the thing is, that doesn't need to be exclusive to this type of game. Any checklist open world game can do the exact same thing if they wanted, while even keeping the same lookout point system. But of course, that's not happening right now because they just want you to look at the map and go, wow, this world is humongous, straight off the get-go. Speaking of that teleportation that I just mentioned, where 1 minute you're in one area and the next you open a chest and you're met with this blazing red sky or some other incredible scenery that I don't want to spoil, no part of that would have been ruined if the chest was just marked as a chest on the map of a Ubi-Type game. If every single one of the chests were marked on the map, that takes nothing away from the surprise of opening one of them up and being yeeted straight to hell. And just to be clear on my point here, I'm not saying, oh man, I wish Elden Ring had marked chests. I'm totally fine with there not being marked chests in Elden Ring. I'm saying that the creativity and the surprise there is not linked to the fact that this is an iconless open world. These other games could do the exact same thing if they wanted, but again, they just don't. Here's another example. The cool part about the CO for Riverwell isn't the fact that you found this tiny building, it's the fact that the elevator inside takes you on a 20-minute ride into an underground dome with its own skyline. The actual stumbling onto this is not the most interesting thing it does, it's the fact that it takes you to such a crazy place out of nowhere. These are the elements of Elden Ring that stand out the most to me, and they are, in my opinion, things that could easily be added to these other games despite their formula. With the release of Elden Ring, I've seen a lot of talk about how it shatters the tired open world norms that we've grown accustomed to, and how other studios need to look at what they're doing and make this the new template to follow. But as far as the big picture goes, I disagree. I've laid out what I believe are the benefits and downsides of their chemical buildups, and personally I think the push for the new norm should actually follow a game like Ghost of Tsushima, which gives you a guiding hand but still lets you discover things on your own if you choose to do so in a very intelligent way. I don't think the inherent identity of Ubi-Type games is bad, and I actually think that having too many games where it's sort of the responsibility of the player to find purpose in the exploration would get tiresome a lot faster. At least personally, I think that'd make these games really exhausting to play eventually, and I hope that's not the lesson that's learned here. What I hope is learned from Elden Ring is its proclivity for playing with your expectations. It provides so many incredibly unique locations, it has surprise underground areas, you can't walk 10 steps without a story being told by the landscape. The fact that the catacombs and caves started out so generic and predictable, and as you went along your expectations of where they could lead and how you were meant to get through them was constantly being challenged, these are the things that developers should be taking away from this game. If enemy encampments can each have unique formats and level design, or items that you pick up during your playthrough can suddenly lead you to a secret cave with its own 2-hour pocket of a wholly unique area, or any number of more inspired, smaller choices, I think the style of game can be revitalized, and I really hope that it does, because even now, when done well, I do honestly really enjoy these games and the experiences that they present. But what do you guys think? Is the only thing the open world genre needs a quick kick in the keister and a revamping of the smaller elements, or does it need a full makeover a la Elden Ring? Do you think Ubi-Type games are hopeless? Do you actually vastly prefer them to these other games? Let me know in the comments, subscribe if you're new, like the video, and I'll see y'all next time. Peace.